Hey guys, today's story is a little different. It's not about stolen money or corporate backstabbing, it's about something colder. Something quieter. It's about the betrayal that doesn't make headlines, but it leaves a scar you carry in every room you walk into. It's about when your own mother looks you in the eye and tells the world who mattered and who didn't. And if you think karma's slow, wait until you hear this. My name is Mark Delaney. I'm 39 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon. I run a mid-sized development firm specializing in community-focused housing projects. Nothing glamorous, but deeply personal. I build things that last, maybe because, for most of my life, I came from things that didn't. That includes the idea of being part of a family. See, I was never the favorite. Not even close. That title was reserved for my sister Elaine from the moment we could both talk. She had the shine. The charm. The story my mother liked to tell. I had the practicality. The silence. The seat at the edge of every family photo. But I didn't resent her, not at first. I just learned to live small. To make myself useful. When my father passed away, I was 17. Elaine was off at boarding school. I stayed home. Took on a night job to help cover bills. Did repairs around the house. Fixed the roof myself. Cancelled college plans to stay close. My mom said thank you once when I repaired the water heater with parts from a junkyard. She called me clever. I remember thinking that was the proudest she'd ever sounded. But even then, it was said like I was a handyman out of sun. Elaine, on the other hand, could do no wrong. She switched majors 3 times, left a job at a non-profit after 2 months, spent a summer, finding herself, in Costa Rica. Every time she came home, Mom treated it like a royal return. Sunday dinners were scheduled around Elaine's arrival. Conversations rerouted around her interests. When she announced she'd be launching her own nonprofit for empowerment through art, my mom burst into tears. I'd never seen her cry for me. Not when I graduated from night school. Not when I bought my first condo. Not even when I paid off the last of Dad's debts in her name. But still, I kept showing up. Not because I wanted approval, I'd stopped expecting that years ago, but because a part of me still believed in the illusion of family. I convinced myself that maybe one day, something I did would matter to her. Maybe, in some quiet moment, she'd realize what she missed. But life doesn't hand out moments like that. You have to carve them. Which brings us to March. My mom's 70th birthday. Elaine arranged the venue, some upscale restaurant downtown. Private room, catered menu, tiny personalized menus with gold foil print. She called it a milestone worth celebrating. I flew in early. Spent the afternoon helping set up. I even brought a gift to watch with "Always your son" engraved on the inside. I gave it to her before anyone else arrived. She opened it, smiled faintly, said, "You always get such practical gifts," and placed it back in the box. No hug. No real thanks. Just indifference wrapped in civility. I sat through the dinner quietly. Elaine talked, of course she did, about her upcoming art initiative in Morocco. How her podcast had been picked up by a niche European platform. How she was mentoring young creators remotely now. Mom beamed. I nodded along. Ordered a sparkling water. Tried not to calculate how much the wine pairing cost per person. When I finally spoke briefly, just answering a question about my latest development project, Mom interrupted halfway through to ask Elaine if she remembered the vegan place they went to in Santa Fe. And then came the toast. Mom stood up, her hand lightly tapping her wine glass. The room stilled. She looked around, smiling. 70 years, she began. It's strange to say out loud. I've lived through so much. Raised 2 children. And I just want to say this, I'm proud. proud of where we've all landed. But, if I'm honest, only one child truly made me proud. And I think everyone here knows who that is. There was laughter from one of Elaine's friends. A nervous kind. But mostly silence. My fork hovered above my plate. I looked up. She wasn't looking at me. She didn't need to. Her eyes were on Elaine, who raised her glass like it was nothing. Like this moment hadn't just cut my name out of the family history in front of a full room. No one said a word. Not my uncle. Not my cousin Maria. Not even Elaine's boyfriend, who I'd once helped get a referral when he lost his job. They just watched. Elaine leaned toward me, glass still in hand, and whispered, "Don't take it personally. You've always been the quiet one." That's when I stood. No anger. No outburst. Just the slow screech of a chair on marble tile. I looked at my mother and said, "Well, I'm glad you finally said it. Now I can stop trying." Then I walked out. No one followed. And for the first time, I wasn't surprised. So, before you get pulled in, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually believe that betrayal always comes back around. Let me know where you're watching from and if anyone ever tried to rewrite your worth right in front of you. Now sit back, let the room go quiet, and let me tell you how it really went down. I didn't go back to my hotel that night. I drove around for a while past the river, past the neighborhoods where the lights from the windows made every house look like a photo I didn't belong in. Eventually I found myself parked outside a 24-hour diner, one of those old places with checkered floors and a jukebox that barely works. I sat at the counter, ordered coffee I didn't want, and just existed for a while. There was something oddly comforting about the fluorescent lights, the distant hiss of a fryer, and a waitress who didn't know me well enough to ask if I was okay. Sometimes anonymity is mercy. I thought about the toast. The sentence. Only one child made me proud. It wasn't new, not really. It was just the first time she'd said it aloud, without dressing it in politeness or excuses. And strangely, hearing it that clearly gave me a sort of permission I'd never had before. Permission to stop playing along. To stop bending into shapes for someone who never wanted to see me anyway. I finished my coffee, left a tip that was probably too big, and drove back to the hotel with a strange calm setting in. Not peace. Just stillness. The next morning, I didn't go to the family brunch Elaine had arranged. Instead, I walked the city. Past the apartment where my father had first lived when he moved to town, past the high school where Elaine won debate nationals, past the bookstore where I used to spend hours as a teenager because it was quieter than home. Memory wrapped around every block like I've unwanted, but rooted deep. I realized then how much of my life had been built around proximity. Not to love, but to approval. To the idea of being seen. Later that day, I got a text from Elaine. It read, "Hey. Hope you're not mad. Mom didn't mean it like that." I didn't respond. She didn't follow up. Back at work the following week, I was quieter than usual. My assistant, Jenny, asked if everything was all right. I said yes. That was easier than explaining. But something had shifted. My team noticed it too, not in a bad way. I was sharper. More decisive. Like a dam had broken and all the mental noise I'd been dragging behind me was finally gone. The moment at dinner hadn't just changed how I saw them. It changed how I saw myself. Like I finally stepped out of a house I'd been haunting my whole life. That shift grew into something else. Reflection. I started revisiting old files, photos, records I'd saved over the years. Things I had kept out of loyalty or guilt. And somewhere in that mess, I found a document, an old financial report I'd stumbled across during a property transition 10 years ago. A nonprofit filing. Elaine's name on it. Only the numbers didn't quite add up. At the time, I hadn't cared. I'd chalked it up to accounting quirks. But now I looked at it with different eyes. Sharper ones. That single document led me down a rabbit hole. A nonprofit operating as a front for an arts education program that hadn't filed impact reports in 3 years. Grants received. Funds unaccounted for. A board full of her college friends. Travel expenses disguised as consulting fees. I wasn't an auditor, but I'd worked long enough in real estate to spot fraud dressed in self-congratulation. And there it was. Proof. Not just of negligence, but of the kind of mismanagement that would shatter her image. The same image my mother worshipped. The golden daughter wasn't just flawed, she was careless. Maybe even criminal. I sat back in my chair, the printouts in my hand trembling slightly. Not from anger. From opportunity. I had never wanted to tear her down. But now, for the first time, I understood that telling the truth wasn't vengeance, it was clarity. And clarity is what finally lets you breathe. I didn't go public. Not yet. That would have been too easy. Too loud. I know I needed something cleaner. More surgical. Something that wouldn't just shock them, but reveal them. Not just to the world, but to themselves. Because the only thing worse than being exposed is being exposed by the one person you always overlooked. I started planning. The thing about secrets is they rarely rot in silence, they beg to be aired. But I wasn't interested in airing anything recklessly. I wanted precision. I wanted the truth to land not as scandal, but as revelation. If I was going to unveil what Elaine had built her reputation on, I had to do it in a way that no one could accuse me of bitterness, of jealousy, of old sibling rivalry. I needed the truth to walk into the room wearing nothing but facts. So I began collecting. Quietly. Every grant Elaine's nonprofit had received in the last decade. Every press release. Every article she'd written or been quoted in. I cross-referenced names, funders, board members, project locations. Most of it looked fine on the surface, but the longer I spent inside those documents, the more inconsistencies I found. Projects that were in progress for years without updates. Inflated success metrics. Photos reused from different initiatives to pad her annual reports. It was a mirage. A beautifully crafted illusion that had never been seriously questioned, because no one dared. Or cared. Until now. Still, I didn't want this to be a witch hunt. I wasn't trying to destroy her. I wasn't even angry anymore, I was methodical. Focused. And maybe that's what scared me most. That the part of me once desperate for acknowledgement was gone. Replaced by something colder. More exacting. Not cruelty, but justice. Over the next few weeks, I spoke to a journalist I trusted. An old client, actually a guy named Russell who'd once written a piece about shady zoning practices in the city. He owed me a favor. I didn't give him everything at once. Just breadcrumbs. Enough to get his interest piqued without tipping my hand entirely. "You sure about this?" he asked after the second meeting. "She's got a shiny reputation." I nodded. And a lot of shadows behind that shine. But I wasn't stopping there. I remembered something else. A moment years ago when I'd been helping Mom with her taxes. She'd mentioned having co-signed a loan for Elaine. Just a small bridge loan, she'd said at the time. For her nonprofit expansion. At the time I hadn't looked into it. But now, I pulled the paperwork. It wasn't a small loan. It was 6 figures. And Mom was the guarantor. That changed everything. Because now it wasn't just Elaine who was vulnerable. It was the woman who toasted her pride so loudly it echoed. That's when I paused. I remember sitting at my kitchen counter, the documents laid out like crime scene photos, and asking myself, what exactly am I trying to do here? Expose Elaine? Free myself? Punish Mom? The answer surprised me. I didn't want revenge. I wanted release. I wanted this story to stop being rewritten without me. So I made a new plan, one that didn't just call them out, but forced them to confront the version of me they never acknowledged, the one who was paying attention, the one who remembered everything. I decided to use the upcoming Family Foundation Gala. Elaine was being honored again. She'd be giving a keynote. The room would be full of donors, press, extended family, and of course, my mother. I RSVP'd. And then I made a call to the venue. I asked about multimedia capabilities. Told them I'd be making a short tribute presentation to celebrate the family legacy. They were happy to accommodate. I sent a file. A cleanly edited 6-minute video. No narration. Just timelines. Documents. Screenshots of filings. Juxtaposed with Elaine's public claims. All true. All verified. No accusations. Just undeniable math. And I waited. The night of the gala, I arrived early. Wore a tailored suit. Smiled at the check-in table. Hugged distant relatives. Took my seat near the stage. Mom saw me from across the room and looked surprised. She waved hesitantly. I didn't wave back. Elaine opened the evening with her usual grace, thanking donors, describing her vision, making the room feel inspired. She was always good at that. Always knew how to wrap herself in the language of change and heart and authenticity. Then it was my turn. The MC introduced me. Mark Delaney will now share a short tribute to the family's legacy and public service. Applause. Elaine looked confused. Mom looked concerned. I stepped up. Clicked the remote. The lights dimmed. And the truth played out in 6 minutes of silence. When the video ended, I didn't say a word. I just stepped down from the stage and walked out the same way I had on Mom's birthday. This time, they followed. But I didn't stop walking. I didn't wait for the fallout. That's the thing about truth, it doesn't need an audience to echo. I went home, made myself a late dinner I didn't finish, and sat by the window as the city drifted into sleep. No music. No television. Just the dull hum of night traffic and a stillness I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't peace exactly. It was weightlessness, the kind that comes after cutting a rope you've been dragging behind you for too long. Around midnight, my phone started vibrating on the kitchen counter. Unknown number. Then another. Then Elaine. I let it ring. Then my cousin Rian, he was there at the gala, wasn't he? The calls stacked like bricks, but I didn't pick up a single one. Not because I wanted them to stew in silence, but because I knew anything I said now would dilute what had already been said without words. Truth doesn't beg for explanation. It just sits there, undeniable, daring you to keep lying. By morning, my inbox had exploded. Someone had recorded the video. Of course they had. It was already on a few social media pages, under vague titles like Awkward Moment at Family Fundraiser and Charity Queen Called Out by Brother. The views were climbing. But what mattered more was what wasn't being said. No one could disprove it. Every frame, every receipt, every number was real. Elaine went dark online. No tweets. No posts. No filtered black and white portraits paired with poetic captions. Just silence. I wondered if Mom had seen the clip. I didn't wonder long because by mid-morning she called. I didn't answer the first or second time. On the third, I watched the screen until it stopped buzzing, then sent a message. I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it so you'd finally see me. She didn't respond. Not then. Not the next day. Not that week. It didn't surprise me. What surprised me more was how okay I was with that. At work, everything carried on. My team was focused on our next site launch, and if anyone noticed a new quiet in me, they didn't ask. Except for Jenny, my assistant, who caught me staring out the window during a break. "You all right?" she asked softly. I looked at her and smiled, not a fake one, but the kind that comes when you're finally not pretending. "Yeah," I said. "I think I actually am." Days passed. Elaine finally issued a public statement, carefully worded, professionally designed. She didn't name me. Didn't mention the gala. She wrote, "We acknowledge recent concerns and have initiated a full internal review to ensure our practices meet the highest standards of transparency." It was textbook damage control. The kind of statement you release when you're not ready to apologize, only ready to survive. But that wasn't the part that got to me. It was the silence from my mother. Weeks passed. Nothing. And then a letter. An actual envelope. Cream-colored, thick, with our family foundation's crest on the back. It arrived at my office. I opened it, expecting legalese, maybe cease and desist. Instead, it was an invitation. They were dissolving the current board and forming a new Ethical Oversight Council, and they wanted me to lead it. I read the letter 3 times. They hadn't called me after the gala. They hadn't acknowledged what had been revealed. But now that the spotlight had turned cold, they were trying to rebuild. With me. I set the letter down, laughed quietly to myself, and then shredded it. It wasn't about pettiness. It was clarity. I didn't need their seat anymore. I had my own table now. Instead, I reached out to a friend who ran a youth mentorship program in a tougher part of town. I asked if they needed volunteers. He said yes before I could finish the question. That Saturday, I spent 4 hours teaching a group of teens how to sketch site plans and read building codes. None of them knew my last name. None of them cared who my sister was. They just wanted someone to show up. And I did. One afternoon, after class, a kid named Marcus lingered behind. "You always look like you're thinking something big," he said. I smiled. "That's because I used to spend a long time feeling small." He didn't ask what I meant. But I think he understood. At night, when I returned home, I still checked my phone. Still saw missed calls from extended family. Some messages were polite. Some were angry. A few asked why. Why I'd done it like that. Why I hadn't just spoken privately. Why I dared it all. The answer was simple. I had. For 39 years. And no one had listened. Until I stopped asking. By the time fall rolled in, the leaves weren't the only things changing color. Conversations shifted. People who once sang my sister's praises suddenly spoke in careful tones, as if unsure which version of her was now real. I watched it all quietly, not out of spite but with the kind of detachment that only arrives when you've finally stepped out of someone else's shadow. Elaine didn't reach out again. Not a call. Not a message. Not even a deflection through someone else. But that absence, once something that would have torn me apart, now felt more like a door that had finally shut. Permanently. I didn't hate her. I didn't need to. She was living inside the consequences of a story she'd written. All I did was hold up a mirror. And sometimes the most painful truths are the ones people told themselves. Mom eventually called. It was a short conversation. Tense. She didn't apologize, not really. She just said, "You didn't have to humiliate her." I listened. Let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I answered, "You humiliated me every year you pretended I didn't exist." She tried to interrupt, but I kept going. "I didn't make that video out of hate. I made it because the truth never needed your permission to exist. She cried. I didn't. When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. It wasn't about winning. It was about unbinding myself from a narrative I never wrote but was forced to live in. In the months that followed, I started writing. Just for myself at first. Short essays, personal notes, scattered memories. Eventually, I gathered enough pages to realize I had a story worth telling, not for fame, not for attention, but because somewhere out there, someone else had been told they were invisible. And maybe hearing mine would help them see themselves again. A literary agent friend I'd helped years ago offered to take a look. She was honest. Told me, "This is raw. It's not a memoir. It's a reckoning." I smiled. That's all I ever wanted it to be. We pitched it under a working title, The Other Sun. It sold. A modest deal. Nothing flashy. But enough to know the truth still had power when spoken in the right voice. Around the same time, the mentorship program asked me to lead a small weekend intensive. A kind of future builders bootcamp for students on the edge of giving up. I said yes without hesitation. That weekend I stood in front of 12 kids in a borrowed community center with cracked walls and flickering lights, and I taught them how to sketch dreams onto paper literally and figuratively. At one point, a girl named Lila asked, "Were you always this confident?" I laughed. No. I used to measure myself by someone else's ruler. Then I built my own. They didn't need to know the rest. Not the galas, not the board seats, not the birthday toast that started it all. These rooms, these quiet afternoons where nothing viral ever happened, this was the win. My mother didn't attend the book launch. Neither did Elaine. But a few of my students came. They waited in line like everyone else. And when they reached me, they didn't ask for autographs. They asked, "What's next?" And for the first time in my life, I had an answer. The book was never meant to be a bestseller. When I first started writing it, I thought maybe a few hundred people would read it. I thought it might be passed around quiet circles, dog-eared in local libraries, maybe quoted in an article about sibling dynamics. I never thought it would take on a life of its own. But it did. And not because I was famous or had a massive platform. It spread because people recognized themselves in it. Not the gala or the nonprofit drama, but in the ache. The ache of being overlooked, of being the other child, the background character in your own family story. A month after it launched, I found myself sitting across from a national morning show host. Lights in my face, microphone clipped to my collar, and a producer whispering, "You're up in 5. And all I could think about was the kid I used to be sitting at the back of the class, drawing floor plans in the margins of his notebook, wondering if anyone would ever say, "I'm proud of you." That morning, I didn't need anyone to say it. I was already living proof of it. After the interview aired, the messages poured in. Old classmates. Strangers. One woman wrote, "My sister was always the golden one. Thank you for giving voice to the rest of us." A retired teacher said, "I wish I'd seen more of my students the way you see those kids. It was humbling. Overwhelming. Beautiful." Elaine never reached out directly, but I did get a card from someone I'm almost certain was her assistant. It was impersonal, generic. "Wishing you success in all your endeavors." I tossed it. Not in anger, but because I didn't need it. My piece didn't require her permission. Mom sent a longer letter. 3 pages. Typed. Apologizing not for one moment, but for a pattern. For the small dismissals, the uneven expectations, the years of silence. It wasn't perfect. But it was the first time she acknowledged the pain she'd helped shape. She ended it with, "I didn't know how to love you the way you needed. But I see you now." That line stayed with me. I wrote her back. Not with blame. Just honesty. I told her I wasn't bitter. That forgiveness had come, not in one sweeping moment, but in layers. Through mentorship. Through writing. Through every time I chose to show up for someone else instead of trying to prove myself to her. I didn't expect a reply. I didn't need one. Meanwhile, the mentorship program was flourishing. We secured new funding. Expanded our reach. Some of my students had started applying to college, first-generation kids with dreams bigger than their zip codes. One Saturday, after a design workshop, Marcus pulled me aside. "I read your book," he said. "You were angry, but not bitter. How do you do that?" I thought about it, then answered, "Because I learned that the best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's building something better without them." That night, I walked home under a soft drizzle, the city lights catching the pavement like scattered stars. I used to hate the rain. Now it felt like punctuation, gentle, persistent, washing the past without trying to erase it. One morning, about 6 months later, I ran into Ryan, our cousin who used to host the family cookouts. He looked surprised to see me. We chatted briefly. Then he said, "You know, everyone's still talking about what happened at the gala." I nodded. "Let them." He smiled and added, "But most of them say it changed how they see everything." I shrugged. "Good. Because nothing changes if you keep pretending nothing's wrong." I left it at that. That's the beauty of clarity. You don't need everyone to agree. You just need the truth to breathe. Eventually, the dust around Elaine's nonprofit settled. It wasn't dismantled, but she stepped down as executive director. Took on a more advisory role. Spun it as a transition for personal growth. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, it no longer mattered to me. I wasn't orbiting her world anymore. One night, as I was locking up the mentorship center, I noticed a note taped to the front door. No signature. Just neat handwriting that read, "Thank you for seeing us." I folded it carefully, placed it in my notebook, and drove home in silence. That note said more than any spotlight ever could. I never went back to the foundation. Never accepted the advisory seat they offered. That world had its place, but mine was elsewhere, knowing blueprints drawn on scrap paper, in late-night talks with kids wrestling with who they were becoming, in the quiet certainty that I didn't need revenge to rise. I just needed a reason. And I had one. I was no longer the invisible son. I was the man who built his own name. So, here's what I've learned. Not all justice arrives like thunder. Sometimes it comes like breath, soft, steady, undeniable. For the longest time, I thought being seen meant being loud. I thought it meant forcing the world, or my family, to look at me, to acknowledge the weight of what they ignored. But real strength doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It stands. It builds. It shows up over and over, even when no one claps. I don't live for their approval anymore. Not my mother's. Not Elaine's. Not the extended family members who stayed silent until the tide shifted. I live for the moments that matter. The kid who finally believes he's worth something. The message from a stranger saying, "You put my story into words." The quiet mornings when I open the center and realize I've created a place where belonging isn't conditional. The past doesn't define me. It shaped me, yes, but it doesn't get to finish the sentence. I do. And the version I'm writing now? It's patient. It's kind. It's sharper than it's ever been. I used to want a reckoning. Now I want impact. And that shift, that's where the real revenge lives. So if you're watching this, and you've ever been overlooked, silenced, dismissed, let this be proof. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to be chosen to have value. You just need to choose yourself. Again and again, until the noise fades and only truth remains. Thanks for listening to my story.